When I look back at the strangest morning of my life, I still remember the sound of rain tapping against the windows of my little apartment in Cedar Falls, Iowa, because that was the morning I discovered that a forgotten $3 scratch-off ticket had turned into a $68 million lottery jackpot. And for the first time in 15 years, I realized I had been given something more valuable than money, the chance to decide my own future. My name is Natalie Harper. I was 40 years old, and I had spent most of my marriage convincing myself that my husband, Grant, was simply careful with money, when in reality he had slowly turned financial control into the invisible fence surrounding my entire life. Grant had always insisted that gambling was foolish, and whenever I mentioned buying a lottery ticket, he would laugh and say, "People like us don't get lucky, Natalie, so stop throwing money away," before reminding me that every dollar should have a purpose, even though he somehow found perfectly good purposes for expensive watches, golf weekends, and business dinners that I was never invited to. I worked part-time restoring old photographs for a local historical society, kept my modest earnings in an account Grant rarely discussed, and had learned to hide even harmless purchases because questioning me about a $20 sweater could somehow become an hour-long lecture about responsibility. But everything changed on a stormy Saturday when my daughter Sophie and I stopped at a roadside market in Bellwood after her soccer practice, and she pointed at a bright blue scratch-off ticket near the register. I bought it almost as a joke, scratching the first few symbols while Sophie complained about being hungry, and when the final number appeared beneath the silver coating, I thought the machine had printed the wrong result because the ticket showed a prize so enormous that my mind simply refused to understand it. I scanned the ticket twice at the store kiosk, watched the screen flash a message telling me to contact the state lottery office, slipped the ticket into the lining of my purse, and drove home through the rain with my hands trembling on the steering wheel, because suddenly every ordinary thing around me, the grocery bags, the school uniform hanging in the back seat, the unpaid electric bill on my counter, looked like pieces of a life that might already be ending. I did not tell Grant that night, and instead I waited until Sophie was asleep before sitting at my kitchen table with the ticket beside my cold tea, where I began writing down every question that frightened me, including whether the winnings would become marital property, whether Grant could force me to surrender control, and what would happen if he discovered the money before I understood my legal rights. The next morning, I contacted an attorney named Evelyn Brooks in Des Moines, a woman recommended by a retired accountant I trusted, and Evelyn's first words after seeing the ticket were, "Natalie, forget the champagne and forget the mansion. You need privacy, documentation, and a plan before you claim a single dollar." Over the next several weeks, my life became a secret operation conducted between school runs, ordinary dinners, and Grant's increasingly frequent business trips, while Evelyn assembled a financial team, helped me document exactly where the ticket had been purchased, and explained every step of the claim process without making promises she could not legally guarantee. Then, while organizing documents in Grant's home office, I discovered something that changed the entire meaning of his behavior. A folder containing investment statements, property records, and a private account I had never known existed, with transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars and several payments to a company registered under the name of a woman named Camille Rhodes. I confronted him without mentioning the lottery, asking simply, "Who is Camille Rhodes?" And for the first time since I had known him, Grant lost control of his carefully rehearsed expression, because instead of answering, he asked how much I knew, which told me more than any confession could have. That evening, he admitted that he had been hiding investments from me for years and had been seeing Camille during business trips. But when I asked why he had lied, he stared at the floor and said, "Because I knew you would leave if you ever had enough money to do it." And I realized that his greatest fear had never been losing me. It had been losing his ability to control whether I could leave. I still did not tell him about the ticket, and with Evelyn's guidance, I completed the legal process, created an independent financial structure, and claimed the prize after months of preparation, receiving approximately $38 million after taxes rather than the headline amount, which was still more money than I could comprehend. I bought nothing extravagant, told no reporters, and did not post a single photograph online. Instead, I quietly purchased a modest lakeside property outside Madison for Sophie and me, established an education fund for her, and arranged for professional management of the remaining assets, while I continued living in the same house and letting Grant believe that his world remained unchanged. The moment I finally confronted him came 3 days before our 15th anniversary, when I placed copies of his hidden financial records on the dining table beside a photograph of Camille and said, "You spent years preparing for a future without me, Grant, so I think it's time I prepare for one without you." And when he demanded to know how I could possibly afford an attorney, I placed the lottery claim confirmation in front of him and watched the color disappear from his face. He whispered, "You won." And I answered, "Yes, and I deliberately waited because I needed to know whether you loved me when you thought I had nothing to offer you." Immediately changed his tone, promising therapy, transparency, and a new beginning, but every promise sounded strangely similar to the rules he had imposed on me for years. And when he finally shouted, "That money should belong to both of us," I calmly replied, "You spent 15 years making sure I had no financial freedom, and now you're angry because I found some without asking your permission." The divorce was difficult, but Evelyn's careful preparation protected my interests. The hidden accounts became part of the financial proceedings, and although Grant fought fiercely for control of the jackpot, the court ultimately rejected his attempt to claim the fortune as his personal property, leaving him with his legitimate share of the assets we had actually accumulated together. A year later, Sophie and I moved permanently to our lakeside home, where the mornings smelled of pine and rain instead of coffee and tension, and I reopened the photography business I had abandoned years earlier, eventually turning it into a small company that helped families restore damaged photographs and preserve their histories. Grant survived without the fortune he had once imagined controlling. Camille disappeared from his life almost as quickly as she had entered it, and I stopped wondering whether winning the lottery had ruined my marriage, because the truth was much simpler. The marriage had already been broken, and the money merely gave me the courage to stop pretending otherwise. Today, when Sophie asks why I never bought another lottery ticket, I tell her that the ticket was never the miracle people think it was, because the real miracle happened afterward, when a frightened woman sat alone at a kitchen table and decided that her future deserved to belong to her. If you ever find yourself waiting for permission to become the person you were meant to be, remember Natalie Harper's story. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't the money that falls into your hands, but the courage to finally choose what happens next. And if this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.